So this is the variety of factoring cards that we currently have made. We have the 5 main types of factoring: removing a common factor, trinomial factoring, perfect square trinomials, difference of squares, and then sums and differences of cubes. Each type of factoring progresses from simple to complex, and that's indicated by the letters. So for example, for trinomial factoring, there's variations A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. And the 2 is just to indicate that anything that has a 2 with it is trinomial factoring. For each set of cards, there's a title card, there's a set of red factoring cards, and a set of blue product cards. If the students are working on the distributive property, they can start on the factor cards and try to match each factor card with the correct product. So they can take the product cards and just spread them out. And then they can take each of the factor cards and see if they can find the match. So here, this is 2 times the quantity x minus 2, and they can look for the match. So that's going to be 2x minus 4. And they can take the next card, 4 times 2x minus 1, and they can see if they find the match for that. And so on. Now, when students are finished, they can turn the cards over and see if they've gotten it correctly. So when they turn this card over, they see that on the back they have the 1A1, which is the set, RCF for removing a common factor, which is the type, and this is card number 7. So when they turn this over, they should see that everything should match, and this means this is card number 7, so they got that correct. For the second group, this is card number 9, but this says 10, and therefore they know that they made an error. Now, as students work, the number of red cards and blue cards do match, so everything should match up. So when they're done, they usually will find their mistake because they'll end up with an extra card or not enough cards. But if they do match everything up, they can check their work on their own and then self-correct. So once they get here, they can say, oh, right, it's 4 times 2x, which is 8x, 8x minus 4. That's going to be the correct match. And then they can check by turning the cards over. When students want to work on factoring, they do it in the opposite order. They can lay out all the red cards and then start with the blue cards. And so now they're going to look at 2x minus 4 and think about how does this factor. They might recognize that, oh, well, I can divide both of these by 2, so I could remove a 2. And then they can do the division to see that 2x divided by 2 is x, and that negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2, and they can keep working to match all the cards. And then they can flip them over and check their work there. So one of the advantages of using the factoring cards rather than just doing it on paper and pencil is that students can actually work in both directions even though they're focusing on going one way. So for most students, using the distributive property to multiply is easier than factoring. Now, we want students to be able to factor, to look at the product form and to be able to kind of undo that and see where that product came from. But oftentimes students will kind of cheat a little bit, and they'll look at the card with the factors on it and start to multiply that out. Now, in the end, we don't want them to have to do that, but as students are learning, as they're looking for patterns, that's actually a really helpful and useful thing for them to do, because we want them to make that connection between those two forms. And as students are multiplying, maybe they say, well, okay, I can multiply this times 3. They'll notice that the results are all divisible by 3, which then later they'll look at the card that is in the product form and they'll say, wait a minute, I know these things look like I multiplied something by 3 to get here, therefore I can go backwards now by dividing by 3. And so it's really nice for students to be able to work in either direction, and it can help them make that connection a lot stronger. So one of the more difficult things for students to do is to know which type of factoring to do. I mean, if we give them a whole page and say, these are all difference of squares, go ahead and factor that using that technique, they'll be able to do that. Or if we say these are trinomial factoring, they know what to do. But if we just give them an expression and say, factor this, can they recognize which tool they need to use. And that's another way that we can use the factoring cards, is to help them just with that recognition. So I'll show you how that can be done. So let's say students only know two types of factoring, removing a common factor and trinomial factoring. We can take two sets and remove the factoring cards and just start with the product cards. And we can shuffle them all up so they're all mixed up. And now we can ask students to say, if you were to factor this, which technique would you use? Now for this one here, you say, oh, well, there's three terms. It looks like it could be trinomial factoring. However, each term is divisible by 3, and therefore we could use removing a common factor to do that. For this next one, there's only 2 factors, so it can't be trinomial factoring. So it's going to be removing a common factor as well. For this one, there's a trinomial, but there's also no common factor that we can remove. We have 6, 5, and 1. So this is going to be trinomial factoring, and that's the technique. So as students work through this, they aren't even factoring. They could, of course, do that, but they're just simply sorting to see what technique they would use if they wanted to factor. And they can check their own work by turning it over. So here, it says TF in the middle. That tells you it was trinomial factoring. And for these other ones, they do say RCF, so they know that that was the correct technique, removing a common factor. So as students learn more and more techniques, this becomes more challenging. So when they have perfect square trinomials and regular trinomials, can they really look for that pattern in the perfect square trinomial to know that, yes, it's a trinomial, but it has that a squared plus 2ab plus b squared pattern? Or when they just see an expression that has 2 terms in it, it could be removing a common factor, but it could also be difference of squares. And so these are the kinds of things we want students to be aware of. And the matching cards allow students to get lots of practice with lots of variety, and they can be very independent with the work because the answers are right here with them. And if they get stuck, they can always ask the teacher or a friend for help. So it's great for group work in the classroom as well. It's also really good for review. If you haven't done factoring for a while or the distributive property for a while, you can just grab a set off the shelf and give it to a student and say, you have 5 minutes, go ahead and match these. Or here's 2 sets, go ahead and sort them right before lunch. So it's a material that's really easy to use and can be used for review, for practice and discovering patterns. And again, it's great for group work or individual work. It's just a really nice material to add some variety to the follow-up work for all the different varieties of factoring.